Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thrive, where I believe you were not created to survive, but to thrive. And if you change yourself, you can change your world. I'm your host, Alex Segai. I am extremely excited today. Today, I'm pumped. It's going to be a very different episode for this week. Today, I have a very, very, very special guest with me. I'm excited. I'm pumped. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I have the one and only, my beautiful wife, Diana, with me. And so thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for stopping by
I feel honored.
The Thrive Studios. And thank you for being here. I want to start first and foremost.
Yeah.
So I know we watch some podcasts and we've seen some videos. And, I watched some where I think in our culture right now was really popular is they do this like segment right at the beginning where they give people their flowers. Or for example, I watched another one where they take a moment to acknowledge the guests and like the stuff that the guest has done. So I thought it'd be cool. When I have guests, I want to just take a moment to honor them.
Okay.
So it's just going to be just regular honor. I want to take a moment to honor you. I love you. I love you. I love you. And I think a lot of people may see you, but they don't know just such a hard worker that you've been. And a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. You're an incredible leader. So I want to take a moment to honor you. I love you.
Thank you.
I thank God for your life. You are absolutely brilliant. I do think you are a genius. I love when we are in meetings together to hear your voice, your opinion, your mindset. You say things that absolutely helps us all in an incredible way that we don't think. You are extremely dedicated. You're a hard worker. I think you are brave. You're a champion. The way you have just taken on what life has thrown at us, the different leadership roles. You rise to the occasion. You're not afraid. Fear is one thing that I think doesn't exist in your mind. You are absolutely brave, intelligent, and now seeing you thrive in a new season as a mother has been even more beautiful. So I want to take a minute to say, I want to honor you.
Thank you. I don't want to cry in this podcast, but thank you. I love you very much, and I appreciate you, and thank you for always championing me to do all those things.
I think you're incredible. Since I met you, I noticed there was something about you that was absolutely different. In fact, why don't we start there? Let's talk about, we've talked about this before. And I
feel like everyone knows this, but maybe not.
Yeah, there may be some new viewers. Yeah. There's been a couple of series that we've done together where we talk about our story, or a leadership night where we've talked about our story. And obviously everybody has a story, but maybe there are some new viewers, or maybe we can talk about some details that maybe we haven't gone into before. Maybe let's talk a little bit about how we met, and then I just want to go a little bit into your life, your upbringing, maybe your spiritual life, and how it played out in your earlier years, and then we'll see where this goes.
Let's do it.
So let's talk about first and foremost when we met. I'll never forget. We have a mutual friend. We had a mutual friend. She's still our friend today. We love her very much. Ceci. Huge shout out to Ceci. We love Ceci. So I was part of this young adult ministry that was exploding. It was thriving. And I was serving there. I was part of that team. And our friend Ceci, she's a few years older than us. She kept telling me, like, she had this friend that she was working with, that she was trying to get this friend to come visit us on a Friday night. We had a Friday night young adult service. I think we were over 1,500 young adults at that time. The ministry was exploding. It was awesome. I was all in. I love serving God. What we were doing was incredible. But I was single at the time. I think I was 23, 24 years old. And I was 23. Yes, I was 23. And Ceci kept telling me, I have a friend that I think you're going to like. In fact, I'll never forget, we were at a friend's apartment one day. She showed me pictures, and I go, this is the friend I want to introduce you. I knew. I saw the pictures, and I said, yeah, you need to bring her to church as soon as possible. She needs to come.
What were those pictures?
To
was
Jesus.
It me like at a club or something like that?
I think one of them was you at a club, and they were off your MySpace. This is when we all had MySpace back in the day. And so one of them was, I'll never forget, one of them was a picture of you at a club. This is before Hannah really gave her life to Jesus. Another picture was of you and your mom. And I saw those pictures, and I was like, okay. You need to invite her to church. I thought you were absolutely gorgeous. And so I'm like, sure. And some weeks went by, and I think I'm like, is she ever going to come check out what Jesus has for her life?
Well, I had a boyfriend, so I was just with my boyfriend.
I wasn't going to go there, but yes, let's talk about that.
Because you always go there. It was, she had a boyfriend, but she met me, and,
It's the truth.
Yeah.
So finally, you ended up deciding to visit one Friday night.
Yes. So Sassy, I used to.
Because you guys were on a break, you and your boyfriend.
Yeah. So I used to go to school with
God
Sassy.
works out all things for
mysterious
the good of those who love
ways.
him.
And so she would tell me about this church, and I had already gone to like a Christian church when I was younger. When I was like 17, and at that point I was 20, turning to, or 21, 20. Yeah. 20 years old. And she starts inviting me, and at that point with this person I was dating, I had realized, great person, nothing against this person, right?
I think different than me.
I think I had just realized that we were on different pages in life. Yeah. Like how he saw his
different
life.
Different chapters.
Yes. Like I just didn't see myself.
Different books.
Correct. Yeah. And so in one of those breaks, whatever you want to call it, that's when I decided to go to church on that Friday night. And that's when.
So I say this story all the time. I'm sitting in the front row, and I'll never forget it. I'm sitting in the front row. I'm with Jason. We call him Pookie Jay. Love you, Jay. He's still my best friend to this day. I love him. That's my brother. We grew up together. He's sitting next to me that Friday night. He's sitting right next to me. I'm in the front row. And I knew, Ceci told me you were coming that night. And I knew you were about to walk into those doors. We had a side entrance, and the place was packed. There's 1,000 young adults there waiting for service to begin, over 1,000. I'm looking, and I'm like, all right, where's Ceci? You know, everybody's kind of moving around. We all start to sit down because service is about to begin, and the doors open, and you and Ceci walk in, and I saw you, and I'll never forget. It's one of those things that I can't explain. I think the other day we were talking about it in the car, and we said, if somebody told us what we did as far as like the decisions we made and how quickly and fast we moved, we would say, I don't know if that's recommended. We would probably
advise them to just go a little slower. Yeah.
But it's one of those things where when you know. I saw you, and I told Jay, I said, I'm going to marry her. That's the girl I'm going to marry. That's the girl I'm going to marry. I knew it. I just knew it. It's unexplainable, and obviously, you know, we joke around a lot about it, but honestly, I don't know what happened that night that I just knew you're the one I was going to marry. It's one of those things, weird things. The Lord
spoke to you.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think a few days later, weeks later, there was also something in you. You kind of knew, like, yeah, we're going to end up together.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like sometimes we hear stories like that, and it's like, it sounds a little weird, a little strange.
Extremely.
I would say for me, everything happened at a very particular moment in my life, where I feel like I knew I was at a kind of like a crossroads, if you will, where my life was headed one direction, but I kind of knew that's not where I wanted to go. Yeah. Again, not that it was like was doing terrible things or anything like that. It's just this wasn't life for me. I kind of felt a different direction per se. And so going back to church and meeting you and like having different people around me, it's kind of like what I needed at that moment. Yeah. And so it reassured that I was on the right path. Yeah. And I can't describe or explain why. It just felt right. Yeah. And meeting you was like meeting someone that was so different from people that I had.
A godsend.
Oh, God. That I had met before, you know. Again, not because I had met like terrible men, although I did in my family and like just in general life. But it was almost a glimpse of that I was looking for. Yeah. You know, like someone who could be fun and just have great conversations, but loves Jesus and is not into drinking and is not into doing all these things. Yeah. And so for me, it was reassuring that, okay, yes, I could do this. Like I could have this life that I, you know, not on this direction. Yeah. If that makes any sense.
I'm loving this podcast already and hearing you say awesome, wonderful things about your husband. Yeah. Okay, really, let's go back really quick. The year was 2008.
Yeah.
It's 2008 where you walk in and, you know, we meet that night. We ended up, I think, hanging out that night. Yeah. We went out with Ceci and some friends, I think at the Chili's on Kendall Drive. And actually that became kind of like our Friday night hangout for the next couple of weeks. I think maybe 2 months later, December is when we finally decided to, you know, start going steady, whatever you want to call it, boyfriend and girlfriend. You were already done with that other relationship that you were in. So a few months later, we decided to, hey, we're going to do this. But by that point, I remember there was a small conversation we had at some point that we already knew we were going to get married. I hadn't proposed.
We were sitting in your old Honda Civic, gold Honda Civic.
Accord.
Yes,
I had a gold Honda Accord.
Yes. And
I don't know who had the Civic, but yes, the Accord.
Same thing. Same thing.
Yeah, the Accord, but I get it.
The Accord, whatever. And we talked about, we're gonna get married. Like,
I remember.
Like matter of fact, like, just because we're gonna get married.
We just knew it.
And I would have never, like, that's not something I would have ever said, because we often share with people I wasn't looking forward to getting married. Like, it wasn't something that I was.
And you just said something a little while ago. You obviously had other boyfriends before me, and I had other girlfriends before you, but you knew that wasn't for you. And same with me. I grew up in church, and in the church, there was girls I liked or that we went out with, and nothing bad about, but you just know it's not for you. So it's not like we didn't have other opportunities to make that decision with other people to get, be extremely serious and get married. No, we did. I said no. I remember I was like, no, this is not for me.
Yeah.
I remember after a few months in one relationship, I just knew that wasn't for me. And I'm like, I don't want to continue this further because I don't want to hurt the other person or me get hurt, whatever. But with you and those conversations that we had at the very beginning, it's crazy how we were talking about marriage right at the very beginning.
Yeah.
It was wild. It's one of those things where we both.
So for me, it was even more strange because of that. Like, we talk about often how you grew up with a good image of marriage and family and your parents being together and, this whole dynamic. I didn't.
Yeah.
So to me, marriage, again, it wasn't like this horrible thing. I never want to get married, but it was just simply not anything that I considered or that I gave that much thought.
Yeah.
Especially that young, because along with that would be, I would have never in my life thought that I would be getting married at 21. Mm-hmm. That's like, no, I always thought I'll get married when I'm 30 and I have a career and I have all these things going on for me. So it was, that stage in my life was almost going against everything that I thought my life was going to be like. Yeah. But it was a beautiful thing in that sense because it's just kind of like the God story in it.
Absolutely. I think you were 20. I was 23 or 24 when we met, when we went to get married. I was 24, turning 25, and you were 21. Can we talk about that just a little bit? I know we did it in a recent series, but your perspective on marriage and where it came from. Maybe why don't you tell us a little bit about your home growing up? You have an incredible mom. But your mom is divorced, and so your parents split when you were young. What do you think shaped that perspective that you had on marriage?
Definitely my parents. So my parents were married, I don't know, for probably like 10 years before I was born, something like that. I don't really know. My mom raised me kind of like Catholic, my family, her side of the family was Catholic, so I was very much going to church with them and whatever. My dad was an atheist, and he was very particular in the way he lived life because of the way his own life was that I didn't really fully understand or realize till later on in my life, but just very different. Like, it's interesting how different they were. And so the relationship that they had was a very I guess toxic I kind of hate that word, but it was just a difficult one in the sense that everything had to be my dad's way. Yeah. Right? Like, it's whatever my dad says, what he says goes. I think at the beginning, very much like putting my mom down, like, you need me, without me, you're nothing. This is stuff that
you remember as well.
Yeah. And so the different thing is that my mom had a good job and whatnot, but my dad had a significantly higher position with, a lot of money. And my mom couldn't maybe necessarily afford the things that my dad could afford or the house that my dad could have. And so I feel like there was always that overpowering feeling over her, like, you need me, or you're not, like, you're nobody without me. And then it was just very verbally abusive in a sense, but a kind of abuse that I might not just like curse you out or something, but it's just psychologically. Yeah. Like, just kind of that psychological abuse where it makes you feel like you're so small and you're such a nobody. And then my dad, surprisingly, was very much against marriage for someone who was married. Yeah. So just very different than how my mom was. And then when I was 9 years old, my parents divorced. My dad was unfaithful to my mom since probably the day I was born. And it just continued on for years and years and years until my mom just couldn't take it anymore. And I feel like my mom really tried her best to do everything she could. Not that she was perfect, you know, none of us are, but in the sense of like caring for her family, protecting her family, caring for me, protecting me. But it got to a point where it was just too much. And probably when I was 9, or maybe even a little younger, maybe 8, I didn't know this was happening. So my mom and my dad would sleep in different rooms from like since I remember. I would sleep with my mom.
Why do you think that was?
They just were married by name.
But we're separated basically.
Yeah, like together but not together.
Yeah.
So I had this bond with my mom because we both had to live through certain things. Like before it was just her, what he would do to her. But I remember instances where like my mom and I would be like almost afraid of my dad and had to hide things from my dad. Like my dad would come home late at night, and if we were watching TV, would hear the garage door open, and we would have to like turn everything off and like go to the room and do something else because your dad got home, and God forbid my dad found us watching TV.
Because if you, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a waste of time to watch TV.
Yeah, like you should be reading a book.
Right.
You should be doing something productive with your life. You shouldn't be watching TV.
Yeah.
So I feel like in that sense, my mom and I built that bond where it was like this person and then there's us who were united, and, you know, just the different kind of love I received from them. Yeah. You know, my dad was very cold. My mom was so loving and caring. You know, doing homework with my dad was the worst nightmare. Yeah. Like I would tremble if my dad sat next to me to do like math homework with me. Wow. Because how do you not understand? How do you not, right? So it was like this pressure that I never felt with my mom. Yeah. So what I was gonna say is probably around 8 or 9, I'm the one that went up to my mom and told my mom, I think my dad, there's something wrong with my dad and his secretary. Because in his office, like I would find her lipsticks, and then she started asking me weird questions about my parents, you know, like, oh, how does your dad behave at home? Is he nice to your mom? And things like that. And then I told my mom, of course, already knew they had a thing. But I think that gave my mom the courage to now speak up. And that happened. Then my dad, I remember my dad picking me up from school one afternoon. Probably like the day wasn't even over. It probably took me out of class and sat with me in the car and told me, you know, you said these things about this person, but here's the thing. I've always been a very sensitive person in the sense of like very caring or compassionate. I always feel bad for people. And so he said, this lady, this woman, she is the one that provides for her family, and they're poor. So if you say that she said those things and she asked those things, I'm going to have to fire her. Mm-hmm. But imagine her poor family, right? Like her family is probably going to starve because they need her. But if you say that you lied and she really didn't say any of those things and she gets to keep her job and like her family is going to be okay. And I said,
it was manipulation.
Yeah. And he like cried to me. I remember him sitting next to with the door open, the car door. And I felt so bad for this lady that even though it was true, that how was I going to let a family go hungry? Like, oh my gosh,
that's a lot to process as at 8, 9 years old. Yeah. That's a lot to take on and process because you are thinking about a lady who you know is doing wrong, but at the same time, her family could absolutely go through a big loss if she were to lose her job. Which was probably a lie anyways, but... but you're trying to process this at such a young age.
But I think it happened, and I said, you know, I lied. I'll say I lied so that my dad can go in. But my mom already knew. Like, she knew that what was happening. I mean, it had been happening for many years with multiple women. But I think at that point, once it involved me, it gave my mom the courage that she didn't have before to make a decision. So I remember my mom I just feel like my life has been very much like very adult conversations at a very young age.
Yeah,
and
so
a lot of adult processing.
Yeah, what I was going to say was, I think facing that kind of stuff from such an early age forced you to mature a lot quicker.
Yeah.
You were having some real deep conversations.
Like, I remember my dad going on a trip, right? My dad's a huge communist. That's just going to put that out there.
Just throwing that out there.
And so my dad, I grew up hearing about Cuba and how wonderful Cuba was. And so I always wanted to go to Cuba. I was a child.
And by the way, wonderful, not in the sense of a beautiful island and beautiful people. Beautiful as far as he thought it was beautiful, the way it's ran, government.
Right. Equality for all. And so I always wanted to go to Cuba because, you know, my dad's been talking to me about this place and showing me books and everything at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old.
There's a picture of you with a Che Guevara book and banner in your room because that's the way he wanted to bring you up. Yeah.
And so I remember him planning a trip to Cuba, but he didn't take my mom and I. He went, I don't know, by himself. My mom finds out that he's with his secretary in Cuba. He comes back and he's unpacking gifts that he's brought us. And then he gets to like these 2 little things. And it's like, oh, I brought this for my secretary. You know, I felt bad not giving her anything. And my mom and I'm 8 years old. And my mom and I are like.
You guys already knew.
Like, you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Nice try.
Yeah.
But anyway, so my mom ends up having.
But it forced her to grow up.
Yeah.
Quick.
So my mom ends up having this conversation with me. I feel like we just threw the communist thing out there and people are probably like now thinking stuff. Anyways, we'll probably go back to that. Maybe not. Maybe another podcast.
Another one.
Yeah. So she had a conversation with me where like now there's no hiding. Like I know what's going on. And so she said, listen, I'm getting ready to like make this decision and leave your dad. But you have to, I just want to know what you think and how you feel. Because if we leave your dad, we're not going to have a nice house. We're probably going to have to move in with your aunt who's...
Yeah, you would lose a lot of his financial abilities. Yeah,
who's like my family. It's probably more on the poor side.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to have any luxuries. We're not going to have access to all these things. Like life is going to drastically change for us if I make this decision. And I remember telling my mom, no, let's do it. Like it's
the right decision.
It's what you have to do. And I remember my mom telling me, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with your dad tonight. Put me to bed. And I fell asleep knowing that they were having this conversation in the living room. And then the next morning we woke up. I think my dad didn't believe my mom was actually going to do this. He woke up the next morning, made breakfast, played music, and my mom and I were packing.
Wow.
And we didn't take anything from the house, just our clothes. And I remember exactly my dad's in the dining room and he's just, I don't know, doing whatever. And then my mom and I have our bags and we say, okay, we're ready to go. And he just looked at us almost like in disbelief that this was actually happening, but very much like whatever, because that's just the way my dad is. And I was like, okay, bye. And we left. And I think, we left. We just took ourselves. We got to my aunt's house, is who we were going to stay with. I'm going to cry. And everybody clapped for us. And everybody was so happy that we were free. And so I see a lot of people go through divorce and have such a hard time understanding or like processing, like, oh, what did my parents divorce? And for me, it was such a different experience, because for me, it was such a freeing experience. For me, it was like, wow, like we get to live life differently now. And so that was life from that point on. Yeah, we didn't have the nice house. We lived in a tiny little room. Didn't even have a closet. Had a stake from wall to wall. The floor was so old that like we couldn't go in or had to be careful past a certain time at night because my aunt was in the room downstairs. And so if we would step really hard, like dust would fall on her.
I've been there. I've stayed there. It's still the same floor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where you guys ended up staying the rest of the time in Colombia.
But it didn't matter. Like to me, my mom's concern of like, was I going to miss these things? It's like, no, because I gained so much more.
So really quick going back to that, because I think you just said something that is a wild perspective, right, from your end, as far as we've talked to a lot of friends and people whose parents have gone through divorce, and in them it's caused, anger or disappointment. They've been saddened by their parents getting divorced. But in your perspective, the house, the upbringing you had was such a tough environment. In fact, there's times where we have a conversation. You're like, if I would have stayed there, if my parents would have stayed together, your life would have been so different because at one point you either would have, no, way not for the better.
Yeah.
You would have rebelled or you would have done God knows what because your dad has such peculiar ways of doing things.
Yeah.
It was literally such a difficult situation of being, although we're not advocates for divorce, and your parents obviously maybe, weren't believers. Your dad is obviously not a believer. He's an atheist to this day. So divorce was the option for them. Obviously, on our end, we try to always advocate for restoration, reconciliation, health, and find counseling and therapy. This was a different situation. They didn't know the Lord, far from the Lord.
Yeah.
They get a divorce, but it was freeing for you. And so your family clapping, your mother was no longer going to be subject to cheating. You were no longer to be in a house where you can't even turn on the TV. You were forced to read communist books at 5, 6 years old. It was such a freeing moment when you're like, although this is not great in one sense, in another sense, we get to live our lives, like you said.
It's the feeling of being able to be yourself, and we've had, again, it will take us forever to go over all these things, but I remember, like something as simple as cutting my hair. Like my dad would hate for me to have long hair. Because only dumb girls have long hair. Yeah, your dad had a lot of specific things that he would tell you. And so that's one of them. Let's talk about also then how we're talking about perspective on marriage. He would say marriage is not an option. They don't last. Stupid. They won't go past 5 years. Right. Yeah, they're stupid. They're just miserable.
And he wanted you to study before getting married. If you got married, it was maybe age 40. I'm not against studying before marriage. Obviously, we're fans of that as well. But what I'm saying is he almost was like, don't get married. Marriage didn't he say, correct me if I'm wrong, it's better to go to the funeral than to a marriage?
Yeah, he prefers going to funerals and marriages than
weddings. So you grew up listening to that. So do you think that affected, shaped why you weren't a girl who dreamt about getting married?
Possibly that, yes. I also think, and I say this, and I love my family and like my mom's side of the family, but I think seeing the marriages that were modeled, it's not that they were bad marriages, but it's not that there's anything wrong with being a housewife and being a mom and not having a career. Like, that's beautiful. Yeah. Right. And in many cases, we need more of that.
That is a career in one sense. Like, you're called to be, to do that.
But I feel like also think of like old times where I would see my aunts just also have nothing that was theirs, in the sense of they would just wake up and they were at the mercy of somebody else. Yeah. And almost like they had no, personality is not the word, but
identity.
Like, right. Yeah. And so to me, it's like I never wanted that. Yeah. Like I
think about our countries. My family's from Costa Rica. Your family's from Colombia. Although I was born and raised here, we know how it is in our countries where, a lot of the men, they go to work. And again, we're fans of that. Men should go to work. They produce, they make the income, they bring their money home, their salaries home. But in our countries, a lot of women, they're just forced to stay home. They almost have no identity. Not even a name.
And it's almost like you just don't have any even dreams for yourself. And it doesn't mean dreams outside of your home or whatever, but it's almost like you've never been taught that you could think further along. It's somebody. Like this is all you could ever be. Yeah. And this is all there's to be.
So you saw that and you're like, I don't want that. Yeah. I'm also capable of studying, learning, having a career. And I think part of that is awesome. Like
I think that absolutely that mixed also with the fact that I am not the most romantic girl in the world, and you're
not a girly girl.
I'm not. Yeah, I might seem like I am, but I'm not.
Yeah, I kind of like that though. I thought that was cool. You never were a girly girl from the time I met you,
right? So like, not even when my parents' relationship, I felt like it was better. It was just not a thing.
Well, going back really quick, I'm gonna jump around a little bit. When I met you, I still remember, because obviously I'd seen you in pictures, the one, the you of the club that we won't get into details. Then the one with you and your mom. But when I finally met you that Friday night, and I've told you this before, and I started talking to you, I just noticed, yes, you were 20, I was 23, but I just sensed I was talking to such a mature girl. Like you were I think you were light years ahead of your age, in the way you spoke, in the way you, you know what, I just love the way you handled yourself. Like I could tell by the way you walked in, you were just, there was something different about you. You were not a girly girl, but you were still a woman at 20 years old, very mature. I felt like you were extremely wise. I felt like you carried something. A couple of weeks ago, I was thinking about this. There was something that you were carrying. There was like a different spirit about you. I don't know how to explain it, but you were carrying something that I think, in fact, I'll say, I know you didn't even know was on you. I felt like I was able to see, no lie, through like a prophetic lens, who you could be, what you could become, what you could do. And I felt like it all happened like in a very quick moment. Yeah. As we started talking afterwards, that I was like, this girl is capable of doing so much, what she's going to do, how she can lead. It's like I saw it. And obviously there's probably people laughing right now. That's because you were in love and blah, blah, blah. But and maybe so, but I just literally sensed it. And I hadn't sensed that or seen that in another girl that I was at least a little bit interested in. But I ought to go back to say, yeah, it's crazy how life happened, because you didn't have that marriage,
right,
ideal date, wedding dress that you had planned for so many years. For you, it was like, cool. Not a biggest fan of marriage. I'll get married one day,
right?
But never thought it would shape out the way.
Yeah, and then I end up meeting you and getting married. 2
months later, we start going out, and 10 months later, we end up getting married.
Yeah,
yeah. So I think a year and 2 months later, we got married after we met that Friday night.
Less than that, yeah.
Yeah. So it was November 2009 that we ended up getting married, and so people thought we were crazy. But I remember I went back.
And with the reason, I would have thought, looking from the outside,
yeah, so we were talking the other day.
Probably would have been like,
somebody comes up to me right now. Somebody in our youth leadership team comes up to me right now and says, hey, I just met this girl 2 months ago. I'm going to marry her.
Yeah, I'll have a million questions.
Same. Absolutely. Wait. Yeah. But I also think we had amazing parents. And so you went back and talked to your mom. I went back and talked to my parents. And we also had some good friends around us. And obviously people gave us counseling and wisdom. But it was absolutely fast. I want to go really quick, jumping back to this situation with your parents. I want to talk about the difference between living with your aunt after your parents got divorced. You and your mom moved in with your aunt in her house that I've been to in Pereira, Colombia. And then living with your dad, but from a spiritual point of view. So obviously we've mentioned your dad just, had a communist kind of worldview, but also he is an atheist, an atheistic worldview, doesn't believe there is a God. And to this day, we love him, pray for him, pray that he will come to the knowledge of Jesus. And you've spent some time with him several years ago, and so did I. And so we're just praying. But him not knowing God and grow up in a household, yet at 9 you move over to your aunt's house where they were extremely devout Catholics, right? How did you figure that out on your own? Because there was something about you. I feel like every time we've talked, there's an inclination about you, even since you were 9, that you knew there was a God. And there was like this love in you for God. Like every time you tell me these stories, it's absolutely beautiful how like at 9 you sensed the Lord and you knew there was a God and you loved God. How did that play out with both kind of worldviews?
I feel like I lived not the best, but I feel like I lived in 2 different worlds.
Yeah.
Simultaneously. So my parents would go to work and I would stay with my aunt. And I think probably I was exposed to God from a very young age, from the moment I was born. So I think that innate feeling in me could have been just that. It's in me, which I believe so.
Absolutely.
But also that I was just exposed to it, to faith.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I would go back home to my dad, and my dad doesn't believe in any of this, but it's already a seed in me.
He would call believers ignorant.
Yeah, you're ignorant. You're like, you don't know. So in Colombia for Easter week, that whole week, that like Passion Week, they do different things at church. in the streets, like they close down streets and they take like the saints and they do
La
stuff like
procesión.
that. La procesión. It's like
Yeah.
parades. I don't know how to.
So a lot of people watch this might know. They do it in their countries as well. La procesión.
Right.
Everybody's out on the street. They carry a Jesus down the street.
Right. And so like for Palm Sunday, you go and you take the palms
Yeah.
and you know, just wave the palms, kind of like recreate it, which were some of the most incredible memories for me. And so
Yeah, you love those.
I love those. I've always said
I do think there's something beautiful about it.
that I had some of the most incredible God, church, like faith forming experiences in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, because my family wasn't how I hear some people describe Catholics. It's like my family was just not that. Like,
No, your family. We've gone, and I've gone to the Catholic church that they go to, and we visited and all that. They're more like charismatic Catholics. And so obviously we may not agree 100% on everything, but there is this beauty to Catholicism where they celebrate some of these things. And we don't make them idols, but I think we need to bring beauty back into Christianity.
Yeah, it's remembering. So,
yes.
So I remember attending one of these with my dad, which I don't even know why my dad would take me. I don't know, whatever. And he would tell me like, oh, all these people are ignorant. And like that thing, that statue, it's just that. It just has no life, which he's right in that. But almost like mocking the whole thing.
Yeah, he would completely.
And I would turn back and like look at my mom and be like,
at that young.
Very young, probably, I don't know, 4, 5, 6.
Wow.
Almost like I knew that wasn't true, like kind of reassuring my mom that. And for someone who was an atheist, the first few years of my life when I went to school, I went to Catholic schools. Like, you know how people
you were raised in private
you know how people
school.
talk crap about nuns sometimes? They say they're mean.
Yeah.
I have the best experiences with nuns. Like,
you tell me your nun
nuns.
stories and they're hilarious.
They're amazing.
Diana to this day will be walking around and you'll see a nun. And you're like,
oh my God, sister, mother.
Yes. I always think it's extremely weird, but
because you didn't have that experience. I have the best experiences.
Well, actually, you tell me you have the best experience with the nuns that you grew up with, and then not only that, you also had some great priests who, again, were very charismatic.
Yes.
So even like the songs that you sang in your Catholic mass, you were 9, 10 years old. There were some of the songs that I sang in my Christian church, and so we'll talk about it sometime. You know that song? I know that song. Yeah. And so, you had a very different Catholic experience.
So going back to your question, it's that I had a strong foundation with this side of my family that was constant.
Yeah.
So my family, they were constant in prayer. Like if I would sleep over, my uncle would just say, okay,
time to pray.
It's time to pray.
Yep.
And we would gather and we would do a rosary and we would pray. And, you know, Sundays it was for church. Saturdays they would take me with them to give communion to the elderly that couldn't make it to church.
This is 9, 10 years old.
Yeah.
I love it.
And so I would go with them to different people's houses, blind people who couldn't walk, and just give them communion, pray over them with them.
That's beautiful.
It was a constant, and it was the greatest experience.
So that is super interesting because although you have one side of the family that is your father, atheist, these people are ignorant, this is all fake, this is not real. You have another side that's giving you a different perspective on faith and prayer and community service. I just think it shows the importance, number one, not to lose hope. I think there may be some parents listening that maybe they've gone through a divorce, and so they're afraid that their kids are getting another experience at another house. But if you remain strong and stay faithful, God is faithful, because look what God has done in your life.
And you know what it was? It's that my family never, now that you say that, my family never tried to convince me that God was real.
They just brought you along.
They just brought me along.
Yeah.
Like my family never sat down and asked me, well, what do you think? Or do you believe your dad? Or do you whatever? But God really is real. It's like they just allowed me to be part of what they did.
Yeah, it's
and
amazing.
It just happened.
Yeah.
They allowed me to be close to.
But it did something to you.
Absolutely.
There was a seed planted in your heart of faith, the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
He started working in you. He started drawing you.
Yeah, like I never doubted God was real. I loved God from day one, and I loved Jesus. And I was, sometimes, again, going back to the Catholic thing, I see my family and in the conversations I have with them, and it's like, no, I knew at a young age that Jesus had died for my sins.
Yeah.
And that was a clear thing.
You knew the gospel.
Yeah. And again, some other things are very different for sure. But the heart and the core of that, it was real and it was true, and it's what I believe to this day in a sense. So yeah.
I think it's, and again, because of time, we're gonna have to do several of these maybe, but I think it's so interesting because fast forwarding a little bit, and we'll get into the details maybe in another podcast. You and your mom end up leaving Colombia. You come to the States.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't have a very, very strong church habit as far as like, you would go with mass with your aunt, with your uncle and all that. But your mom is forced to work multiple jobs.
Yeah.
It's just you and her, especially when you guys finally make it to Miami. It's just you and her. So there's not a church habit. There's faith. Both of you believed in God. You knew the gospel. You knew Jesus died.
Right.
But there's a sense there of almost like there's a spiritual knowledge, but you didn't have a church connection.
Right.
But I think it's so interesting. I'm saying all that to lead to this interesting point. When I met you, I thought this was so... honestly, I thought it was beautiful. You tell me this, and we're going to get into this point. And if you're against tattoos, you can skip this part.
Don't be. If you're against tattoos, reconsider your thoughts.
You were 17 when you first got your first tattoo.
18. I was turning 18. That
Turning
was my
18.
18-year birthday.
Okay, so I remember
gift to myself.
we met. You're 20. When we meet, we start talking. We start sharing stories. This is when you didn't want to hang up. 5 o'clock in the morning. You want to stay with me on the phone. But I remember you sharing this story with me that you wanted a tattoo when you were turning 18. But the first tattoo that you decided to get, again, me and you, very different as far as I come from a church background. My church background is that I was in church every single week. I was
no tattoos.
Yeah, no tattoos. Not only that, like as far as like, I'm in this. I'm serving in church. I grew up from the age of 13 serving in sound, then, hosting, then video team. I did everything you can imagine, right? So I think if I were to get a tattoo at 18, it would have been a spiritual something, because it's my life. But because you didn't for some years, in one sense, you turn 18, you go get a tattoo, and the tattoo you get is the name of Jesus in Hebrew on your ankle. But to me, although it's funny, it showed me there was this genuine love of Jesus, though you were not a church goer, you didn't have a church community, but there was something ingrained in you. I honestly feel it's that the Spirit of God had just taken a hold of you. And no matter what your life was going through, where you were, whether it was Colombia, New Jersey, or Miami, all that you had gone through, the Spirit of God's like, I got you. You're mine. You're going to serve me one day. I got a calling over your life. And the only way you could express it is like, I want a tattoo, and I just want the name of Jesus. But I think there's something so awesome about that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying just tattoos, because some people might get offended. And again, like Dana said, reconsider it and get over it. But and we're not saying go get a tattoo.
But I would say, and this will become a theological conversation if we go down that route, but it was in me already.
Yeah.
Naturally. And again, it's what the foundation my family gave me.
Yeah.
That I just knew. Which
is so absolutely beautiful. And that's why, again, I think the hope is that whoever's watching today and you're like, I'm growing up in a split home, or I got kids that go to split houses. Listen, just trust the Lord. Like when that seed of the gospel goes into a heart, and the Spirit of God will get you. The Word of God
says it is you train up a child. It might be just you, one person, training up your child, and the other person may not. But they will never depart from it. At the right time, that will bear fruit.
And you are such a good example, because not only did you have a non-believing side, it was such a harsh non-believing side, calling believers ignorant, calling all of this faith. To this day, I had conversations with your dad where he's, basically insulting what I do, or not in agreement with what I do. So it's not like you just had any kind of experience. You had very drastic experiences. And then years later, here you are getting a tattoo. You just love there was a love of God in your heart. Yeah. And the way you could express it at 18, I just want his name. I think that's such a beautiful journey. And it just shows what God was doing and wanted to do in your life. Never did you think, years later, you would be leading a church.
No.
Speaking, teaching, helping women see Jesus, teaching church congregation on a Sunday. It's crazy what God would do.
Never.
Yeah. Thriving.
No, never. Again, my experience with church was limited to the Catholic Church for many years. Then at 17, I go to a Christian church, and I loved it. But to me, it was never a matter of churches or denominations or religions. It was just about God.
Yeah, you had a very beautiful, pure experience.
Because a lot of people make this distinction, it was a Catholic church, and there are differences, of course. But to me, it was...
You just love
going
God.
to the house of God, and it's God, and God is incredible. And seeing God's hand in my life and my mom's life through years of, difficult years. So I go back to church because, I was here already. We knew nobody or whatever. We get invited to this Christian church. And it was awesome. You
know what? Sorry. This may go a little bit longer than what I thought, but can we go there for just a second? Yeah. Why? How come you never got upset or angry at God in spite of what you and your mother faced? So, for example, you guys leave Colombia at the age of almost 11. You leave Colombia. You move to Jersey with some family. Your mom finds out about work opportunity down here in Miami. You guys moved to Miami. But when you guys went through it, I'm talking about you guys went. People don't know what you went through. You've kind of like talked about it slightly.
Yeah.
But I came in at the tail end, and I saw how you guys were living, what you guys were experiencing. But people have no idea what you and your mom had to go through to survive. Yet, and I promise you, I just thought about this right now, you never grew bitter toward God.
No.
You never grew upset at God. You and your mom at one point were sleeping on the floor, on a mattress in a one-bedroom efficiency. Your mom working 2 jobs while you're going to high school, just trying to provide for you. Like, you guys had some really, really tough years by yourself.
And if you ask me why I never had, like, anger or... I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I think maybe it goes back to that strong foundation. And I think I never... Again, I haven't even given this much thought until now that you asked the question. But I think I never saw my family do that with God.
That's so good.
I think if I can go back to like my childhood and like living at that house and my experience with my family, I don't think I ever saw my family ever say something bad about God or blame God for anything. So my family struggled, they're poor. They live like not in the worst neighborhood, but not the best one, more in the hood. That's where I lived. And so...
That's where we go vacation in
That's
Colombia.
Where we go vacation.
We go stay with them, and it is awesome.
And so it's like
12 people in a house.
Yeah.
No
it's
hot water.
Even though there were probably many reasons to complain of like what they didn't have, or, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for that, we have just the bare minimum. That was never a conversation.
Yeah.
Everything was thank God. Like, we just thank God for
But you know what? I
have.
think that's a good lesson to learn, because especially our culture. Anything goes bad, why God? Why God? And I love that wasn't even in their minds, your mind, your mom's mind.
Yeah, so it makes me think that a new generation of people who are so angry towards God, many times, yes, it comes from us, but a lot of times it could come from what we've seen and what we've heard other people say. Like, other people are angry, other people pointing the finger. I just was never even not given the option. I didn't think about it. Yeah. Like, God was just always good. And whatever God gave me was enough because it's God. Yeah. And so I don't know. I'm thinking it might have to do with that. And that at the end of the day, I feel like every part of my story, and I say it often, and I love my story. Yeah. Like,
you always say it.
Through difficult and ugly and through whatever the case may be. I love it because it's seeing God's hand at work. Yeah. I love it because to me there's something about the struggle that's beautiful, that nobody wants. But if you look at the people that struggle the most, it's like there's special things about those people and those lives that are so unique and special and beautiful. There's a lesson in all. There's a something to be learned. There's a beauty. There's a strength. There's just God doing something in you and seeing God work through it all.
Absolutely.
You know, through the lack, through the sleeping on the floor, through getting your electricity, you know, cut out, and all kinds of things. Like, that's through that, it's God's hand, you know, and then there's just this thought of gratitude instead of God needs to do this for me.
Yeah. I think there's something that the struggle teaches you that success can never give you.
Yeah.
And so, I think our generation, our culture needs to learn, like, hey, in the struggle, God is good.
Yeah.
Through the worst of times, God is still good. And we don't serve God for good times. We don't serve God for what he can give us. He already gave us all. Right. And you were in love with Jesus. You knew the gospel from a very young age. He died for your sins and resurrected on the third day. And you were just in love with that. And despite of what you have or didn't have or what you went through, or heartache or sleeping on the floor, or remember throwing all your clothes in the car and literally having you and your mom's belongings in a car for a week straight.
Not knowing where to go, You
guys had no idea where you were going to go next. But you never once got angry at God. It was always like, God's going to take care of us. God's got us. I love him. And you're learning something through the struggle. It's maturing you. It's making you better.
You know what I was thinking just a little earlier, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and we had conversations about this. It's about grit. Like, human beings, we need to have some like fighting power in us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like this strength that helps us move forward.
Yeah.
And so not everyone has it, but everyone has the ability to build to it.
100%.
Because if you don't have grit, life is going to run you over. Yeah. And life is going to be even more difficult than it already is.
I would say, although I didn't have your experience as far as like, you know, I didn't have your background. My parents still together to this day. They're 40-something years, wedding anniversary. And I grew up in a pretty good house and neighborhood. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. We were middle class, maybe lower middle class, but there was some times where maybe the lights are out. Oh yeah, we'll turn them on tomorrow. You know, whatever. But you know what I did see? I saw grit in my parents. They never gave up, never complained. Hard work, discipline, responsibility, and they taught us that from a young age. And maybe we're getting old because I feel like we talk about it now, and we're always talking about like this generation doesn't have, and it's like it's so true. I think there's something that success can't give you. That the struggle does. It forms some character in you, some grit, some tenacity in you, where I think that's why you are unafraid and not fearful of a whole lot of things. Because you're like, I've been through the mud, I've been in the dirt, we're going to be okay. I don't care what life throws at me. We're going to get back up, and you got to go to work. I saw my parents working all kind of jobs. They're literally, as a child, I remember it was me, my brother, and my sister on a rooftop on a Friday night. We were as small as can be. My mom would go get Kentucky Fried Chicken, bring it up on the roof because my dad was installing a sign, and we were all working together.
Our parents didn't have time to sit down and cry about life.
Yeah. No, they literally just had to make it happen.
They needed to make it happen.
Yeah.
Our parents didn't have the opportunity to
not being bitter, sad. They did it with a joy in their face.
Yeah.
And there's something beautiful about that. And so I was a huge shout out to your mom, huge shout out to my parents. They taught us grit. That's a good word. And you use that word a lot. And I do love it. And
there's nothing more annoying than meeting people who lack grit, who are just so passive and just just with the wind. I just, swaying everywhere. It's like, no, you gotta have something that moves you and drives you and strength and that's
and
what
learning
life
how to
is
stand.
about.
And like Paul says, and after having done everything, stand. You got to stand. Life is going to throw wind and waves your way. Yeah. This is a leadership podcast. We're talking about thriving. And in order to thrive, I've said in some of the episodes, you just got to overcome.
Yeah.
You got to overcome.
You have to.
And not just survive, but overcome and thrive and have a mentality. You know what? I'm going to get up tomorrow, and God's for me. God's with me. I'm going to thrive. I'm going to go after it. And all these years later, here we are now, started our family, have a 1-year-old daughter, and we're believing God still. He can do new things each and every single day. So I think it's a beautiful story. Well, I think we're going to have to continue this. We're already.
We didn't even get to talk about what we're going to talk about.
We didn't even scratch the surface. We just went a little bit into your history and your spiritual history. I think that was really cool. But thank you for being here. I love you. Let's do this again.
Let's do it.
I love you.
I love you.
Cheers. Thrive.